210 people die in Syria today, mostly in Al-Maysar and Al-Bab in Aleppo. Lavrov says that Moscow and Washington agree on the goals in Syria, and Brahimi says that his mission is partially impossible.
I'm still in that frame of mind.
Also, the United Nations says that more than 2.5 million Syrians are in need of humanitarian help, and China says that buffer zones will not solve the crisis. Welcome to Orient TV English News Bulletin. We start with a new atrocity committed by the regime forces in Aleppo, where they killed at least 64 Syrian civilians in the neighborhood of Al-Maysar and Al-Bab city, raising the death toll in Syria today to 200 until now. In the meantime, citizens are still struggling to pull the dead bodies of bombing victims from under the rubble, as the artillery shelling was renewed this morning on various parts of Aleppo city and its suburbs, which was accompanied with violent and continuous airstrikes.
The citizens of Al-Maysar neighborhood woke up on a new massacre, where the regime destroyed an entire building and its residents. The sound of massive explosions, launched by the regime's random bombing, was heard by the civilians of Aleppo, at a time where the fierce battles reached its peak between the regime forces and members of the Free Syrian Army. A new scene that the citizens did not get used to in the Sukkari, fire whose flames reached many residential buildings, which caused by the flare of the bombing, where the regime heads randomly against civilians. Heavy bombing reached every single neighborhood, as well as the massive destruction.
Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!
And in conjunction with that, airstrikes were intensified on the neighborhoods of Tariq al-Bab. 1 or 2 shells fired were not enough by the snipers, that also used many gallons of explosives that were thrown by their airplanes, and its only concern is to crush civilians with its hatred and hastiness that has never been witnessed before. Masakin Hanano, Al-Maysar and Azaz neighborhood, its citizens are living horrific scenes of terror under the bombardment of the regime's helicopters that are still flying over the skies of the cities and shooting at civilians. The same scene is also witnessed by the citizens of Salah ad-Din neighborhood, who are besieged by the Sirbiha forces. The Free Syrian Army, and despite the fierceness of the regime's horrific campaigns, still fights to save victims from the pool of the regime's ruins. Scenes like this one that show the Free Syrian Army distributing aid to those in need.
Over to the Syrian capital, where the fierce military campaigns continue to destroy neighborhoods and kill unarmed civilians. And today, heavy shelling was renewed on Al-Tadamun, Al-Qadam and Al-Asali, where the regime used rocket machine guns and mortar tanks. And in Al-Qabun, the state forces have executed at least 16 civilians by direct gunfire. And also at least 3 people have been killed and many others were wounded due to the artillery bombing on Al-Hajar al-Aswad. On the other hand, fierce gun battles took place in Tishreen neighborhood between the Free Syrian Army and the government troops. Meanwhile, in the suburbs of the capital, the mortar shelling continued on the cities of Al-Dmir and Al-Madamiyah, killing dozens and destroying many houses. And in the areas of Al-Sayyida Zainab, 2 houses were completely destroyed after 2 shells fell on them, while the areas of Al-Mleha and Al-Hujayra came under violent shelling and heavy gunfire. In another development, 4 people, including a woman and a little girl, have been murdered due to a car bomb blast that also injured many citizens critically. The explosion took place in Jaramna in Damascus suburbs, causing considerable damage to homes and properties.
Two explosions with 2 explosives shook the Chiefs of Staff headquarters in Abu Rumman neighborhood in the heart of Damascus. Al-Farouq Battalion and the descendants of the Prophet committees of the Free Syrian Army took full responsibility of the operations, which came as a response to the massacres of the regime in Daraya and Damascus. The explosions were the second of their kind in a 2-week period, which indicated, according to experts, of a big security achievement for the Free Army that made it possible for it to reach very important parts in the capital Damascus as a Chief of Staff headquarters, as well as bombing the security building, which killed 4 officers, including the Minister of Defense. The regime forces tried its best to close the road leading to the scene of the explosion and setting up security barriers and searching passers-by, procedures which were followed by new military campaigns on the areas of Damascus, especially on the neighborhoods of Al-Asali, Al-Khadam and Al-Hajar Al-Aswad, using helicopters and rocket shells, which resulted in killing civilians, including children.
And with us on the line right now from Damascus is Lena, who will tell us more about the deteriorating situation in Damascus and its countryside. Lena, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, too. Well, let me tell you today that the shelling is continuing here in Damascus and Damascus suburbs, in Al-Hajar Al-Aswad, Asali, Tadamun, even in Zabadani. Zabadani has been under shelling for several weeks right now, but unfortunately, nobody's talking about this, even though that we know there are no operations for the Free Syrian Army there. However, Zabadani is under shelling. Also, extrajudicial executions are taking place all the time in several parts of Damascus and its suburbs.
How are they conducted, Lena, if you don't mind me asking?
Day by day, people are found dead by sniper fire or direct gunfire to people's heads, to civilians' heads. So this is going on all the time. Today, let me tell you more about what happened also in Masjid. Today, bulldozers entered to the area of Al-Farouq neighborhood behind Al-Razi hospital. These bulldozers destroyed stores and destroyed houses. I talked to an activist there, and she told me that Assad forces were actually destroying the walls and the houses that had pro-revolution slogans on them.
Okay, would you be able to tell us why would they do something like that? What is the reason? I mean, it's just a wall. Why would they be destroying walls? Is there any specific reason for that?
Well, because the regime wants to suppress any kind of revolution. It wants to burn it to the ground. It wants to hide the evidence that this area is a revolutionary area. So those civilians were asked to paint these walls, or else regime forces will go into the neighborhood and destroy these walls. Civilians were also asked to write pro-regime and pro-Assad slogans instead of these pro-revolution slogans.
Can you clarify when you say they were asked?
They are afraid of having their houses destroyed.
Can you please
tomorrow.
clarify when you say they were asked to write pro-regime and pro-government slogans? Who asked them and how?
Security forces, they have destroyed several walls, several shops, and then they threatened the people there in the area that if you don't paint these slogans, if you do not hide all signs of revolution and replace them with pro-regime slogans, you will have your houses and stores destroyed as well. This is what they were told.
Okay, Lena, let's continue with the bomb blast that took place in Jaramana. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, well, Jaramana is very well known to be a relatively quiet area. It's relatively a safe area. But now it's being targeted with car blasts. This is not the first time. So today, a woman with its little girl, she died during this blast. Of course, we believe that the regime is behind this because Jaramana now is inhabited by so many people who escape the shelling in other places. So people come there, they go there because they think it's safe, And now the regime wants it to be to destabilize the area, just like the rest of other areas in Damascus and its suburbs.
So, Lena, mainly the regime forces are hunting down the refugees who are flee the areas that are being targeted and go to safer areas. They are hunting them down and targeting them wherever they go.
Of course, we had an instance where people were refugees. They were sitting in Sikki Garden. Sikki Garden is a very famous garden inside Damascus. We were told that Shabiha attacked those people, those refugees, those homeless people, in order to drive them away from this garden. Let me tell you something now about the refugees. We all know that refugees were sitting in schools. The regime allowed those refugees to remain in schools and to be offered help by civilian community activists. But now we were told by those activists that the regime has issued a notice that these schools should be emptied because the school year is around the corner and it is going to start very soon. So we don't know where those refugees will go. They said that they will open up stadiums for them and they will keep them in stadiums or in parks or in gardens. But the numbers of refugees are very, very high and likely to rise even more. So we don't know how this will affect the capital and affect the stableness that the regime is trying to pretend that the capital is very stable and nothing's going on. But we think that this is about to change in the next few days because the refugees are going to be spread on the streets.
Lena, thank you very much. We'll follow up with you on this very topic regarding the refugees who are staying in the schools. Thank you very much for your update and for your valuable input. Coming up later in the bulletin, the GCC countries say that a transitional government in Syria is desperately needed. Welcome back. You're watching Orient TV English News Bulletin. Over to Idlib, where the artillery bombardment was renewed on the towns of Sirmin, Al-Kastan, Saraqib, Al-Nayrab, and many others in the province. An activist reported hearing voices of gunfire from anti-aviation and heavy weapons in the neighborhoods of Al-Thawra and Al-Dabit, while sounds of explosions and shelling shook the city. In Homs, shelling renewed on the neighborhoods of Derb Alba, Jurat al-Shiyah, Al-Qarabis, and Jober. While in Al-Qusayr, the regime forces deliberately bombed the city for long hours in response to the liberating of one of the security barracks and the national hospital by the Free Syrian Army. The regime continues its random bombing on the city of Latakia, where it targeted many villages and caused severe casualties. More about Latakia we see in the following report.
Several were wounded and killed due to the bombardment of the regime forces that was launched on Latakia suburbs, especially Mount Kurds, where the area was subjected to extensive airstrikes and left a massive destruction. This comes amid the heavy clashes between the Free Syrian Army and the government forces in the village of Durin, Istarba, and Al-Qasab Tower that was heavily populated with the regime snipers as the Freedom Army freed it from the regime's grip that was suffocating it. The village of Azankufa is also a stage for the regime's wide military campaigns that were supported by helicopters and tanks. The campaigns of destruction and burning many residential building compounds began, which targeted many greenlands near Mount Kurds and Turkman, where the fire expanded, also to target the forests, which turned into ash. And amid the military campaigns on Latakia suburbs, the citizens show resilience in their motto that they have taken on themselves, which is death, but never humiliation.
Moving on to the south of Syria, where 11 dead bodies were found in Tafas in Daraa province, while the shelling renewed on the towns of Khirbat al-Ghazali, Al-Lajat, Inkhil, and Busra al-Sham. as the state army stormed the town of Saida amid heavy gunfire. Moreover, mortar shelling and heavy artillery attacks continued on most of the areas in Dar'a and its countryside, conducted by Al Panorama Artillery Battalion. Meanwhile, the city of Sheikh Miskin came under heavy artillery shelling since the early morning hours, and heavy shooting was heard from the regime forces barriers in Al Yadude.
Mad killing campaigns are being carried out by the regime forces against civilians. The city of Tafas witnessed the arrest campaigns of the regime for a group of citizens who were held captive and then killed after their bodies were found in the area of As-Saada that is positioned near a security barrier of the regime forces. A new massacre is added to the regime's records that are being committed in Dar'a and the rest of the Syrian provinces. Rocket launching was continued on the area of Al-Laja, Dar al-Balad and Khirbat Ghazali, which left a massive destruction in properties and led to injuring many citizens. This comes while the regime forces are still holding dozens of corpses for the citizens of Hawran captive and is refusing to give them back to their families. Invasion campaigns amid heavy gunfire were also carried out in the city of Al-Hiraq, Tasil and Al-Buqa. The campaigns of Isra led to injuring civilians, robbing and burning many houses. The scenery of constant bombings, invasions and massacres pushed the children of Hawran to turn their toys into tools for their daily lives. This comes after the regime forces arrested their parents and killed most of them.
In Deir Zor, the artillery bombardment of the city's neighborhoods renewed in most of the areas, causing considerable damage, as well as the burning and destruction of many houses. In the meantime, in Al-Bukamal, violent clashes erupted between the state army and the Free Syrian Army, and activists reported hearing voices of gunfire from heavy and medium weapons. Coming up in the bulletin, the GCC countries say that a transitional government in Syria is desperately needed. The Ministry of Finance in Syria issued an order to freeze the bank accounts of the defected Major General Manaf Tlas and his family. The ministry issued its decision regarding Tlas under Article 4 of the Anti-Terrorism Act for the year 2012, which states that whoever has financed a terrorist act or more is punished by hard labor for more than 15 years, in addition to a fine of twice the value of the person's possessions and fortune. This comes after the Ministry of Finance in Syria has previously issued a decision to freeze the accounts of those who defected from the regime, including Riyad Hijab and the opposers Michel Kilo, the previous ambassador to Iraq Nawaf Faris, the UAE's ambassador Abdul Latif al-Dabbagh and his wife Lamia al-Hariri, as well as the Syrian ambassador to Cyprus. Politically, the foreign ministers of the Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, stressed at a conclusion of their league meeting in Jeddah the importance of achieving a peaceful transition of power in Syria. At the time, they welcomed the decision of choosing the new UN envoy, Lakhdar al-Ibrahimi. The Council also reaffirmed the importance of providing every kind of humanitarian help possible to the Syrian people. The new international envoy to Syria, Lakhdar al-Ibrahimi, described his mission as almost impossible to achieve, adding that he feared the weight of the responsibility carried by the office. Brahimi also acknowledged some concerns about his mission, saying that he understands the frustration of some people about the lack of international action in Syria, as he put it. In addition to that, Brahimi stressed on the fact that the Syrian regime is the side that is most responsible for the ending of the crisis in Syria.
I'm deeply concerned, as you are, as all members.
In another development, China considered that the idea of establishing safe areas to protect Syrian refugees within Syrian territories will not help solve the growing crisis there. In addition to that, Chinese press sources have stressed that the establishment of safe areas in Syria is not a good policy, citing the latest remarks by Antonio Guterres, that the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, in which he said that lessons learned from history prove that the so-called safe areas cannot provide real protection for refugees. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that Moscow and Washington agree on the goal that should be achieved in Syria, but they differ on how to reach it. Lavrov pointed out that the United States wants to reach the goal through the removal of President Bashar al-Assad and the formation of a transitional government without the coordination with the Syrian authorities, while the Russians' solution requires both parties in Syria to stop fighting and appoint negotiators who must decide all other matters themselves without outside interference. The Syrian women make a big part of the fight against the government of the regime. We see more about the details of women's role in the Syrian revolution in the following report.
The Syrian women played the protagonist and the most important role in the Syrian revolution by simply not only encouraging their children and husbands to protest, but also pushing them to fight until death in order to achieve freedom. The battle of gaining freedom began from Horam Valley, where the movement of women also started, which was followed by Beniyaz, whose women were shot by the regime's bullets. This fact caused the river of blood to explode as the Syrian women paid the price, which started from being detained and goes on until torture, rape and even murder. The role of Syria's freedom fighters also included participating in aiding the injured victims of the regime's military campaigns, especially after the regime forces targeted it with arrest and killing campaigns. This role later evolved after the number of massacres increased, and the role of the women became in getting involved in military and fighting campaigns. Various and important roles were given to women in this revolution, since they are not wives, sisters or daughters of victims anymore, but have become solid roles in the revolution, sacrificing themselves along with men for freedom and dignity.
And before we wrap up, here's another look at today's top stories. 210 die in Syria today, mostly in Al Maysar and Al Bab in Aleppo. Lavrov says that Moscow and Washington agree on the goals in Syria, and Brahimi says that his mission is partially impossible.
I'm still in that frame of mind.
And the United Nations says that more than 2.5 million Syrians are in need of humanitarian help, and China says that buffer zones will not solve the problem. With this, we end our news bulletin from Orient TV. For more updates about the Syrian revolution, please visit our Facebook page. Thank you for watching.